I saw the glint of these knives as they stalked up towards me. You know, I had no training. I wasn't in the army. I hadn't trained as an explorer. I just got out there. These bullets were going right past my head.
Benedict Allen is an explorer, writer, and filmmaker who has been lost in the Amazon for weeks without food or shelter, threatened by armed gold miners, shot at by Pablo Escobar's hitmen, and nearly killed by malaria deep in the jungle.
This dog became a friend to me, and we walked together day after day, me and the dog. But the dog began weakening, I began weakening, and I came to this terrible decision, made the decision to kill the dog and eat that dog.
I'm Tim Green, and I have ALS. But this podcast isn't about ALS. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I'm a father of 5, married for over 35 years, a New York Times best-selling author, an NFL first-round pick, and a practicing attorney. This is Nothing Left Unsaid, where my son Troy and I sit down with extraordinary people for raw, honest conversations about life, its toughest trials, and greatest triumphs. My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Today's guest has spent his life walking into the world's most unforgiving places. Benedict Allen is an explorer who has been hunted by illegal gold miners, shot at after crossing paths with men linked to Pablo Escobar, lost in the Amazon with malaria, and forced into decisions few of us can imagine. This is not a story about adventure. It is about survival, belief, and what is left when everything else is stripped away. Benedict, welcome.
Thank you, Tim. That's a great introduction. Very flattering, I think.
Before we get into it, I know my dad's going to ask, but yeah, I've never heard an introduction that I wasn't expecting Pablo Escobar and gold miners and Lost in the Amazon all in one intro.
Yeah, they were different expeditions as well, actually. The Amazon's been a place of... It's been eventful for me, the Amazon. I've been quite a few times, and quite a few things have gone wrong. And a lot of things have gone right, and we've got to talk about the positives, of course.
Well, let's start with the positives then. You've said you wanted to be an explorer long before you understood the cost. When did the dream stop being romantic and start becoming real?
Yeah, that's so well phrased. It was a romance, I suppose. I was certainly really naive at the beginning. I was, I suppose, 10 years old when I decided I wanted to become an explorer. And I think I had no idea. You know, I knew the great explorer heroes that you will know. A lot of them were British people, inevitably, like the Scott of the Antarctic and Sir Walter Raleigh and these people. It didn't really matter the nationality. These were just extraordinary individuals who went out into the world. And as a 10-year-old, it was just so incredibly exciting. And I suppose I didn't think of the consequence. And nor did I really think I could become an explorer. I don't think, I mean, not really. I believed I could, but if I thought about it a lot, you know, what are the odds? You know, we didn't have very much money. We were comfortable. We weren't starving by any means, but it's still, it wasn't an obvious career path, let's put it like that. We didn't have lots of private money for me just to go off and have a great adventure. But I clung on to this dream, and it became gradually more possible, I suppose. And I think the reason why, looking back, is because of my dad. My dad was a test pilot, and he was part of the team that developed the Vulcan bomber, which in those days, this is in the 1960s, it carried the nuclear deterrent for the UK. So this was quite an important plane. And seeing my dad as a test pilot flying over the back garden with this plane, and he used to tip the wings, you know, to signal to me that it was him flying this thing. I mean, incredibly exciting, this extraordinary jet. Very, very powerful plane, and very sort of charismatic plane. I think it made me believe it was possible for me to become an explorer, to realize my dream. I can see my dad pushing himself to the limit. My dad was a very quiet gentleman, and I think that helped, because it made me think, oh, well, even my dad can do something extraordinary. And I was not a good sports person. I wasn't like you, Tim, who could, a superhero. I'm sure you were at school even before you became an athlete professionally. But I wasn't like that. At school, we had cricket and football. I wasn't all that good. So how was I going to become this sort of Indiana Jones character? I wasn't sure, and I still clung on to this dream. I think just because of my dad, just thinking my dad was a pioneer, and I thought I can be a pioneer too. But it got harder and harder the nearer to reality it came. I went to college or university, we'd say, studied environmental science because I thought that's the sort of subject that would be useful out there in the jungle or in the desert or the Arctic. And still, though, these are romances. This was just an illusion. And then I finished university, and the reality was there. How do I become this? I've got to stop this dream now because I've got to earn money. And then my mum said to me, "Well, look, you've always wanted to be an explorer. Just give it a go once. Just try it." And that's what I did. I worked in a warehouse stacking books, very boring job, but it gave me just enough money to get me to the Amazon and back. The Amazon was my first goal. I thought if I could cross through the north of the Amazon, which no one else had done, and I was an environmentalist. I mean, I cared about the environment. And there's a road that was planned, but no one had crossed through the forest of the northern Amazon along the path of this road. And that struck me as terrible. So I thought I've got to find out what's there along this undocumented bit of jungle before a big road gets pushed through. And so I just went off and hopes it would work out. And that's this lovely thing when you're 20 years old. Actually, I was 22. I sort of had this lovely belief in myself that it would work out somehow. It would work out. That's what it's like being that age. And I wish I had that confidence now. But of course, it wasn't a confidence based on knowledge. I was ignorant, but I still had that belief that I wouldn't die out there. But I soon began realizing how kind local people were. Frontiersmen, all these missionaries, loggers, gold miners. They helped me along, and then indigenous people. And they saw I believed in my dream, and they sort of helped me, and everything was fine for quite a while. I managed to get through hundreds of miles of this rainforest, essentially being helped because I suppose I was no threat to anyone. I was just sort of innocent out there. I didn't know what I was doing, and people just felt sorry for me. And they just, by the goodness out of their hearts, they helped me, passed me on, paddled me through the forest, and then it all went badly wrong. And this is when in reality it really hit me.
Was your dad as supportive as your mom was? Like your mom telling you to go chase your dream, or
No, yeah. I've made it sound like my mum was the one who really wanted me to become an explorer, but she didn't really, because she was the wife of this test pilot who was taking risks. He was up there testing these powerful planes, and just as he had retired, there was I saying I wanted to go out and take risks. So it's really hard for her. She was so supportive and so loyal, and that was really on my side throughout my career, or my early career. My dad thought it was normal. My dad said, "Yeah, brilliant, off you go." And so that his attitude was just go for it, you can do it, in his quiet but sort of powerful way. But my mum, she supported me because it was my dream, but it was so painful to her. And I still remember her at the garden gate, tears coming down her face, saying goodbye, and my dad taking me off to the airport for the first time. And it's so hard for her. It's always hard for the people left behind.
You never really think about the people left behind. That's an interesting point. Benedict, on your first Amazon expedition, before the danger truly began, what surprised you most about how unprepared you actually were mentally or emotionally?
What surprised me about myself was that I got further than I ever thought I would. Because as I said, at school, I wasn't a sort of sporting hero. I wasn't a natural leader, particularly, I don't think. And yet I'd somehow survived by people looking after me. And I did have this thought that, hold on, as people were friendly, they were taking me on through the forest, guiding me. I did think to myself, well, hold on, they don't have any money either. And they could see that I didn't have much to offer, and it helped because I wasn't a threat to them. But they didn't have any money either, and I think that was a great leveler. And I suddenly realised you can get a huge way in life through simple honesty and passion. People see I had this clear dream, this naive dream of crossing through the north of the Amazon, and I think it just resonated with people. And there's a goodness inside people. I was helped by my belief in myself, but it was a belief that wasn't real. In that it was I didn't have the skills I didn't have the knowledge to know what I was taking on. I had a survival kit around my waist. My mum had said, "Oh, all explorers have a survival kit." So I thought, "Oh, okay, I better take this." But so far, I hadn't had to use it or anything, and I think I still hadn't realised what I was doing. I think it was only when disaster hit me towards the end of this expedition, and that's when I had to dig deep. I hadn't had to dig deep at all yet. I'd just been having an amazing time. I was scared because I knew I was ignorant, but still everything was going so well, and it was just. I think it's a very dangerous thing to not. It's like you're training in sports. You need to suffer these little blows as you go along, as you build your knowledge of yourself and your game or your life. You need these little knocks so that you learn to pick yourself up, so that you learn to bounce back, and you know your strengths and you know your weaknesses. I hadn't been tested though in any of this way yet. And when that moment came, which is when I met these gold miners towards the end of the journey, that's when I realized I had to find something in myself. And I was so ignorant, I didn't know where I'd find it within myself. But I knew I was going to have to. I was going to see my mum and dad again.
It's amazing what people can do when we're pushed to our limits. When you hit these moments, whether it's being threatened by gold miners or later shot at by Escobar's men. In moments where violence feels imminent, what takes over for you? Training, instinct, prayer, or something else entirely?
Oh, these are such penetrating questions. If I could just go back to that first crossing. So this time was different from later times. So this was the first time I had this shock of, I'll tell you what happened. I had got to this little hut about 65 miles from the outside world. So I was near the end of my journey. I've been going for 400 miles. There were just 65 miles to go. Just solid forest, but I thought if I just get these last 65 miles, I'll have done it. Everything had gone well up to now. There was this little hut of gold miners inside, and I asked these men if I could stay the night. And I slept in a hammock, and unfortunately these men began drinking. I don't know what really they were thinking, but that I'd upset them somehow. That either they felt I'd stolen some gold of theirs, or they were worried that I'd report them to the outside world, because they certainly were illegal gold miners. But one way or another, having drunk a lot of rum, things were getting bad. They were shouting at me to leave. I thought I couldn't leave. And these men, eventually I heard them creeping up to me, and I saw they had knives. It was a moonlit night. I saw the glint of these knives as they stalked up towards me. And one of them said, "Right, let's do it now." I mean, it's like, these are words you sort of read about in childhood comics or stories or in war films. And I just thought, it was like age 20, these two men drunk with their knives, creeping up to kill me. I was alone in the forest apart from with them. And so nothing came, no prayers, nothing. I just blind terror. I didn't, I had no training. I wasn't in the army. I hadn't trained as an explorer. I just got out there. So pure blind terror, and a sort of instinct came from me. I didn't pray. I'm not a Christian. I have spiritual beliefs, but that moment, I just knew I had to get out. And I crept down to the riverbank, jumped into my canoe. Before long, the canoe capsized. everything I needed in the world was washed away downriver, and I started walking out of the forest. So this was a separate phase, really. So I'd now capsized, I'd lost everything, and I had to walk out of that forest day after day, as long as it took. And this is a very different process because this is now not a fight and flight reaction. This was pure. I had to find it much worse, really. I had time to think about it. I had time to think of my mum and dad who were waiting for me at home. I had time to think of the odds of me getting out, which were very low. I now got two sorts of malaria, which I contracted from the gold miners, and things went from worse to worse, and I really had to dig deep. So this is a very different thing. And again, I found it hard to pray. I tried to pray, but I'd never been a Christian, as I said, and everything just seemed too much. I couldn't believe in myself. I couldn't believe in anything, really. I could believe in my mum and dad, who I knew were out there. So I just had, for them, I had to cope. My technique, staggering along, going in and out of fever, with gradually starving. No, I wasn't eating very much, so I was beginning to starve. The way I kept on going was to think of every step. I built a little castle in my mind, and I began trying to imagine this castle. And every step, I imagined placing a big stone of the outer wall of this castle. Big stone, big stone, big stone. And I followed this compass bearing to the northeast, because I have this compass in my survival kit, thanks to my mum and dad. But gradually built up this fortress in my mind, and it got more and more elaborate. This had a battlements around the edge, around the top, and it had a portcullis and a moat. And these creating something really strong helped me so much. I was able to almost feel the coldness of these granite stones and the sound of these big blocks clicking together, these big, hefty blocks of stone. So I played with this in my mind, this image, and it really helped me believe that if I could break this impossible seeming task down, just do one step at a time, it made me believe that I could sort of somehow do this. I gave myself this massive project, and thinking about that rather than the hunger or my delirium made me cope, I think. Yeah, and I mean, then one day, I'll just tell you this moment because it's still with me. I mean, every time I think about this, all these years ago, I remember this moment. I lay down in a pool of water one day to try and get myself out of this malaria fever. So malaria makes you can't think. You got the shakes, but you just cannot think. Humans can do extraordinary things as long as they can think, as long as they can imagine a better tomorrow. But now I couldn't think of anything, and really it was the end. I just felt I can't imagine my castle anymore. And then I saw something quite extraordinary. And what I saw as I was lying in that pool of water, trying to wake myself up and keep myself alive, was a cut branch. It was the most extraordinary thing, just a branch that had been cut by a fellow human. Because I've been in this world of tangled branches and tree trunks like a prison. Suddenly this cut branch, wow, it's so powerful. Seeing that I was no longer alone. I saw this little cut branch and I just thought, the edge of the world, the edge of the forest it can't be far away. And I still, as I said, remember this little branch. And then I saw other branches and other branches and other branches. And I realized my kind, humankind, were not far away. And I kept on walking. Suddenly, daylight, and I was safe.
Before that, Hope, when you were lost alone in the rainforest for weeks without food, shelter, or water, what was the most dangerous thought, not physically, but mentally?
The most dangerous thought really was that I was alone. I think I think that was the. I think I said earlier that humans can do amazing things if they can think. I mean, humans have extraordinary ability. We're very weak physically as a species. The strongest man or woman on the planet would last, what, just a few seconds against a hungry lion. So we're not powerful in our physique, but mentally, we can do these extraordinary feats of imagination. And as I said, as long as you can imagine a better future, you can head towards it. You can give yourself those goals, believe in the pain being better one day. But humans are also social creatures. And because we are physically weak, that means we rely on our mind. And if you allow yourself to think you're alone in any endeavor, I think that's very corrosive. And for me, I had to try to believe, even when I was alone, as I was that first time in the Amazon, also later on, I came back 10 years later and tried to cross the whole of the Amazon basin, which I did manage to do, but it wasn't without problems. Again, found myself attacked, this time by loggers. These loggers, I don't know if there's time to tell the story, but I will if you like. But basically, I'll just say, we came to a river, these two loggers and me. They were very kindly, they're carrying my bags. So these are they're Brazilian loggers. They were illegally in the forest, but they're helping me on my way. And I thought that's really kind of them. Carrying my bags, came to a river. We cut down a small tree to act like a bridge to get to the other side. And the two men kindly picked up my bags, walked across this tree trunk to get to the other side of the river. And then I was just about to get on it myself, and they kicked the tree away. So they walked off into the forest, having robbed me and left me to die. So, oh no, here we go again. I'm alone in the forest. So I walked day after day, and it was this fear of being alone. I'd been with these two men who'd helped me for a couple of days, and now they had decided, well, actually, I was probably going to die out here anyway, so they must well rob me, So in other words, they were saying my life was worthless. And that was such a slap in the face. It made me feel so alone and so unworthy of company and so useless. Why did these men just kill me effectively by taking all my bags and abandoning me? So this was a dangerous thought, that I'm alone. Of course, I was alone, but I couldn't allow myself to think that because I had to believe there was more to. No one in the world knew where I was, apart from those two men who tried to kill me. So I had to believe there's more to this situation than just me. And I began trying to think of people who'd helped me in my life, like my mum. Again, I wasn't able to pray to God. But I turned to whatever else I could believe in. So I was thinking of my mum, who's still waiting for me at home. I thought of my dad. I thought of my dog. I tried to think of people who cared about me. And in my mind, they'd be willing me on. So I thought, I've got to do it for them. Got to do it for them. But that's okay for a day or two. But if you're going day after day through the trees, I was much more skilled. So 10 years had gone by from my first expedition. I knew how to eat the tips of certain palms. I could fish for piranhas and so on. So my skills weren't that bad, but I had a huge feat ahead of me. I'd lost my map. I had very little bits of gear. So it wasn't looking good at all. But I managed to people my head with people I'd known. There was a man called Pablito, who's a member of the Maxes indigenous community. And these people are called sometimes the Jaguar people because they tattoo stripes on their face and have red paint on their face. So they try and emulate the jaguar, you could say, and have spines in their lips to represent jaguar whiskers. So you could say that perhaps the jaguar is a role model to the Maxes. But Pablito taught me so many skills as someone who was such a proficient hunter. And it was thinking of him and thinking of his daughter. His daughter was a little, I suppose she was 8 years old. I went back to say thank you after this. Trying to, she was by then 10 years old, but at 8 years old, she was able to teach me so much about how to track, for example, pigs, or rather peccaries, I should say, in the Amazon. She would teach me how to you look for their feet in the ground and so on, and how a leaf that's damper on one side might have been flipped over by someone's feet. So she'd show me all these little clues. And I thought to myself, if a girl who's only 8 years old can survive out here, maybe even I can. So it gave me great belief in myself, had been helped and taught by her as part of the preparation for this journey. But more than anything else, being alone now, it made me think, well, I'm not alone. These are people who care about me. And I was able to think of the place as more like my home.
You said that period forced you to make one of the toughest decisions of your life. Without reliving details, what did that decision cost you internally?
Okay, I think, this is really about my first expedition. That first time when I was attacked by these gold miners, I had a dog with me. So this dog wasn't a pet dog. It was a dog that I'd found, whose life I'd saved. It was not being looked after by anyone, and I felt I could do something for this dog, so I healed it. It had cut paws, and this dog became a friend to me. And when my canoe capsized, having been stalked by these two gold miners, the dog was whisked away down the river with all my other possessions, but it came back into the forest and it found me. And we walked together day after day, me and the dog. But the dog began weakening, I began weakening, and I came to this terrible decision. How much do I care about my life? And it's very, I thought to myself, what I need in order to see my mum and dad again, it is, I need food. So I had to weigh up this decision. Bear in mind, this was more than 40 years ago, and I was only 22, and that I was a pet lover. I had a dog called Holly, a bearded collie, a devoted dog at home. And I now had a dog with me, and I thought, I need to eat something. And so I'm afraid I made this decision. And this is something I can hardly remember now. Bearing in mind, again, I had malaria, dipping in and out of fever. But I made the decision to kill the dog and eat that dog. And I've been condemned quite a lot for this. People have said, how can I do it? And the answer is that I suppose, if I was thinking logically, I think, well, I've got to, how much is my life worth? What would my mum and dad think?
Yes, how about survival?
Well, quite.
Survival's
Well,
pretty good,
yeah.
isn't it?
Well, what would my mum say if I hadn't actually tried my best, bearing in mind the dog was dying anyway? But it was so hard. And I think harder in my mind maybe than it would be for most people to understand, because yes, you've got to do what you can to survive, and this dog was going to die. But in my mind, this dog had become this. We were in this journey together. I thought we'll get out together, and so it felt such a defeat to have to do this. That in the end, we weren't going to get out together. So it was hard morally for me, really, because of the symbolism of the dog. Yes, the dog was probably going to die, but I just felt I wanted us both to succeed. And here was a dog who's now in my mind more like a human. So it wasn't an easy one. So on the one hand, people say, well, this is only a dog. Have them say, what's he going on about? It's not like his pet. On the other hand, people say, I deserve to die, basically. And that I still get hate mail letters. This is 40 years later.
I don't. The expectation of you to die instead of eating the dog is kind of crazy.
You'd be amazed.
I believe you on it. I believe you. Well, everybody who sends you hate mail about it, they should try and make the journey, and see if they can make it with the dog.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, a bigger test, obviously, if it had been my pet dog called Holly, maybe that would have been a different situation. And there's an extraordinary thing that happened because I had saved the life of the dog anyway. It was almost so when I was thinking about praying and I was weighing up whether I believed in God or not, I was thinking, well, hold on, God has given me this dog to save my life because I saved the dog. So now I was given this dog. So all of these things go round your head in these situations. You know, you're alone. There's no one to talk to. I couldn't talk to you, Troy, and say, what do you reckon I should do? You know, this is 2 or 3 weeks alone already in the forest. And I was going unable to think. You know, there was every animal, every species around me was trying to fight for survival. The ants, the scorpions, the snakes, the trees, they're all battling it out. And it's not a place to sit back and think about luxuries, you know.
Literally in the Amazon trying to survive.
Yeah, yeah.
Going back to the cut branches and finally seeing the moment you described as a shock of daylight, what did daylight represent at that moment? Hope, exposure, or judgment?
Oh, these penetrating questions. The shock of the daylight. This must have been. This is coming out of the forest. It was just. So I come out of the darkness. I come out of this imprisonment. It felt like tree after tree after tree, week after week. You know, I still don't know how long it took me to walk alone out of the forest, seeing daylight. It was just something rose up inside me and just wanted to shout hooray, you know, I was alive. And I was very, very ill by now, but nonetheless this fog of this malarial fever that I had was lifted by just seeing the daylight, feeling that light. You know, my skin was covered in fungi, it was peeling away. I was not in a good state. And I remember this even now, the light, but then this figure staring at me, this a farmer was just staring, thinking, what is this person who's, you know, he's half dead, he's half alive, some madman who's in rags, he's come out of the trees. So he was staring at me, not in joy or not welcome, just in fascination and horror, and that was disturbing. For me, he was everything. He was a stranger, but he was a companion, a fellow human. And this man was so good because I'm afraid I was trampling through his crop. He had this maize crop. I just wanted to get to him. So this is salvation, this man. And he was just staring in disbelief at me as I staggered towards him. And I don't remember very much more, except I know he looked after me. He put me in his hammock, gave me some strange concoction, which must have been malarial medicine of some sort. And then he put me in a car a day or two later, and off I went to the local city, Macapá, in the back of someone's Jeep. So for me, yes, it wasn't judgment. No, I felt almost vindicated. I felt I had been through this test, and it felt really as if I loved my mum and dad enough to pass the test, if that makes any sense to you. I mean, it made sense to me that my mum and dad had said goodbye to their son with his mad dream of trying to become an explorer with no experience. And I pulled off this extraordinary journey of crossing 400 miles through this forest that no one appears to have crossed, even now, apart from me. And so I pulled off this impossible seeming dream. And it was time to go back and say sorry to my mum and dad for putting through these worries, but also it made me think, wow, I can do it. And I suddenly realized I was much more capable than I ever thought possible. I had it within myself. And maybe a bit of it was my father's genes as a test pilot. Maybe I thought I do actually have the focus, I do have the tenacity of a test pilot. But I think really it was just that I was an ordinary person who realized ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Given the chance, given the right encouragement, they can pull off extraordinary things. And to my surprise, I had actually done that.
I love that. And you certainly did the extraordinary. Becoming the first person to walk the Amazon basin is quite the feat. But when you finally realized you survived it, did it feel like triumph or relief?
I can't get over your questions. They cut right through to the point of everything. They're really good. Thanks, Tim. I didn't. I felt relief because for me, it wasn't really about me. I'm not one of those explorers who's looking for firsts, to plant a flag on a mountain and all of that. It's not really me. I'm driven by curiosity and I'm driven by a desire to improve myself, and push myself. But no, it was relief. This was an expedition where this is the one where I got shot at by Pablo Escobar's men. um, so I don't know why I'm laughing, but there was an explorer, by this stage, proper explorer. But who would have thought that Pablo Escobar would be hiding out in the forest? Just whereas I was trained in jungle survival, and I've lived with so many indigenous people, learning the skills from them. So I was meant to be an expert at coping in rainforest, but I wasn't a professional at dodging bullets, by people who are part of the Medellin drug cartel.
What's the story there? You just happened to cross paths and all of a sudden people started shooting, or
Yeah, I
what's
just waved at him like that, Troy. No, it wasn't like that. It was I was sort of a third way, or maybe halfway through the expedition, paddling my canoe. It's quite complicated, but basically, this was 1992. The world was moving in on him. The special forces from the states, Colombian special forces. Basically, he was the world's most wanted man, and time was running out for him. And unknown to me, and unknown, I suppose, to nearly all the security people around, he decided to nip down into the Amazon on the Colombian-Peruvian border. This is, as I understand it now, he just decided to duck down, stay low. And I unfortunately paddled by his camp, and minding my own business. Paddle, 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 paddle. And he, or one of his people, sent two people to kill me. So I distinctly remember this camp on the riverside. These people struck me as odd. They weren't like the typical Amazon dweller. They weren't fishermen. They weren't people living fairly simple lives on the edge of the riverbank. These were people in office shirts, and they had shoes with fancy buckles and the Cuban heels. I remember that. They just looked like they're used to air conditioning. So these people were not local people, and that struck me as a bit odd. But I was on the border with Colombia. Drug business was going on. There were a lot of illegal, what do you call them, laboratories that were processing the cocaine in the forest. So I wasn't asking questions. This was going on around me. I just thought I'll just keep on going. On the Peruvian side of the river, that's the left side, I think, they were growing the coca. So this traffic was going backwards and forwards. The coca leaves were going over to the Colombian side of the river, and they had these laboratories. So, but I wasn't, I was being an explorer. I thought I'm staying well away from all this. And everyone was so friendly and normal. This is totally normal out there. What wasn't normal was this camp. And what was even more unnormal was two people chasing me, and they fired shots. I mean, these were not practice shots. They were not shots to warn me off. I mean, you could say they might have been, but I knew the difference, even as I knew the difference because these bullets were going right past my head. I mean, I still remember one of these bullets, the pressure wave. It just felt this rifle shot, the power of this projectile going right past my ear, and it was bad. I mean, I'm quite large, I'm 6'4", quite a big target. And these people are just behind, maybe 20, 30 yards, and I'm firing for the front of their boat. and it kept on missing. Pew, pew, pew. Bullets went by. And by the way, local people in the Amazon, they don't use rifles; they use shotguns with big balls in. So that was another reason why I thought this is not good. Anyway, they kept on missing. I was obviously, and I'd love to say, by the way, being British, that I was very calm, like I don't know, 007, just calmly having my martini or whatever as the bullets were going by. It wasn't like that. I was in blind panic, pure, paddling, 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 paddling. And they kept on missing. And I got to the edge of a river. This was my chance. There's a turn off to the right, and I thought I could get there. They still haven't got me. Pew, pew. And I quickly looked over my shoulder to find out why a bullet hadn't got me in the back. I was just waiting for this bullet. And these two men, turns out they weren't so good at paddling a canoe and killing someone at the same time. And the man in the front had his rifle like this, and he was juggling around, trying to put the rifle down, pick up the paddle to straighten up the canoe, and then he'd have a little thing, and he'd try and pick up the paddle again. Anyway, it's getting muddled up, and it clearly wasn't going so well for them. But all I cared about was getting round the river bend. Got round the river bend, out of their sight, jumped into the forest, and this was such a lesson. Wow, this forest had been so scary to me on that very first expedition to the Amazon. This was now my home, my sanctuary. I jumped into those trees, in amongst the leaves. I couldn't be seen, and I was safe, just like that, safe in this place that once was so scary to me because it had snakes and spiders and scorpions. Now it was my sanctuary. Now it was a place that was everything. So that was a huge life lesson for me, that sometimes the things that scare you most can actually save you. They can be on your side.
How did it end with those guys? So that was just it. They didn't see you. You disappeared in the
Yeah,
forest.
I don't write to them or anything. I mean, I don't know what happened to them, but yeah, I stayed down. I was obviously, I'm telling this story now, but it was probably only a minute and a half when they were shooting at me. I mean, it wasn't long. It seemed though forever, and it seemed even longer when I was sitting in the darkness, listening. These people came up. I could see little glimpses of them slowly in the canoe, just listening, 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 listening. And then one of them swore. I don't know what he said actually, but he shouted at his companion, slammed. They paddled down on the water, just out of anger, and then they turned round. So I don't know what happened to them after that. I know Pablo Escobar. He was killed about 6 months later. But I was saved, and I can't quite remember how I recovered the canoe. But it was there somewhere. But it was over, and I just waited and waited. And, yeah, but everyone else was good to me. I should say the Colombians, the Peruvians, they worried for me. Obviously, they heard all these shots, and then eventually they helped me get out.
The amount of once in a lifetime situations you found yourself in is almost comedic. I read about you undergoing rituals like the Crocodile Initiation ceremony. What do those moments with Indigenous people teach you about respect, fear, and belonging that Western systems often miss?
Yeah, after my very first expedition to the Amazon, I barely survived when I got my malaria and so on. And I realized what I've got to do is turn to Indigenous people. I didn't have any money still. I went back to the warehouse in the UK, stayed with my mum and dad. But basically, I didn't, no one was going to sponsor me, especially after my first expedition. But I thought what I'd do is live with Indigenous people and learn from them. And that's what I did. I set off to New Guinea, didn't want to go back to the Amazon after that first unfortunate expedition. And I settled down in New Guinea. And I found myself with the people called the Nyara, who live in the Middle Sepik in Papua New Guinea. And there are a lot of crocodiles there. And the Nyara have I suppose anthropologists would say they have a crocodile cult. They look to the crocodile. It's a highly effective creature. It's lasted a lot of million years. It's a dinosaur essentially. And it's succeeded very, very well. It's tough, it's territorial, and it nurtures its young. So the Nyara look to the crocodile who shares the swamps with them, and they copy its techniques. I'm simplifying here, but this is essentially the case. So every young man has to go through a crocodile initiation ceremony. It's a ceremony that's said to make you a man as strong as a crocodile. And I had been living with the Nyara for a while, just trying to learn the skills of survival, how to cope in rainforest, and so on. And they held their crocodile initiation ceremony. And a young man said to me, look, if you want to be an explorer, you want to learn from us how to live out here in this humidity and amongst the crocodiles and the mosquitoes and the malaria, you should do what we do. I said, oh, what do you do? He said, we go through the crocodile initiation ceremony, and it's secret and it's sacred, and we can't tell you any more about it until you've been through it. But it'll make you a man as strong as a crocodile. I said, oh, that sounds good. However, I could see that people who'd been through the ceremony already had scars running up and down their chest and back, hundreds and hundreds of these little marks, like a crocodile skin, all the way down the chest, all the way down the back. And that looked, I didn't know anyone else back home with these marks. And I thought, it's quite a commitment. And it's not my culture anyway. So, do I really want these marks? It's not my thing. And I also thought it could be quite painful. And to get these marks with scars, how do you get scars? By something being jabbed into you. So I thought that sounded bad. But then I thought, wow, it's quite an honor. I've been asked to go through the ceremony. No other outsider had been through this. And then I heard people shouting up and down, getting very, very excited. So the elders were getting very excited. I said, what's happening? They said, it's amazing. First outsider ever has said yes to going through our initiation ceremony. And it's you. I thought, what? I didn't say I want to go through the ceremony. But anyway, I was honored by being invited. And I knew a few young men by now pretty well. And we all went through the ceremony together. Our heads were shaven. A big arena was erected around the spirit house, which is right in the center of the village. So this arena was made out of bamboo. It's like a screen. And this was called the Crocodile Nest, the Wak Dumba, the Crocodile Nest. And we would be led in there and kept for as long as it took to become a man as strong as a crocodile. And the men began dancing in and out of this nest with feathers and drums, leaves, hugely decorated, calling to the Avuk Wak, who's the crocodile ancestor, to help make this next generation strong, and also calling to us to be brave, which is worrying. It's the sort of time when you start getting worried, why am I having to be brave? Oh dear. And then calling to the women to hand over all the boys, because a lot of the boys are hiding in the forest, not wanting to go through the ceremony. Anyway, we were led to the crocodile nest. So we now had little grass skirts and our heads were shaven and we were pretty scared. We were led into the crocodile nest, into this arena. And now it all began. I can't go into all the sort of, obviously the secret details of it, but the main gist was pretty obvious, I suppose, which was that we were taken to upside down turned canoes and laid on our backs and cut repeatedly with bamboo blades. And this is really bad. I mean, we lost so much blood. I was left to last because everyone wanted to initiate their son first. So I was sort of left having to be brave, thinking, oh dear. And then my turn came and cut and cut and cut and cut. And yeah, it went on for 1.5 hours or so. I don't know. I mean, that sort of time, long, long time, and was very painful. However, it turned out not to be the worst bit of the ceremony because we now had to earn these crocodile marks. And 2 or 3 days later, once we'd recovered from being cut repeatedly with bamboo blades and losing all that blood, we had to sing happy songs around the spirit house where all the old men came out and beat us with sticks. That was bad. And on that first occasion, the sticks weren't very big. They were like twigs, but that made it even worse. They were stinging us. But then later, the sticks got bigger and bigger. And this was going to go on for as long as it took to become a man as strong as a crocodile, which turned out to be 6 weeks. 6 weeks being beaten every day, 5 times a day. 5 was the sacred number, and everything had to be done in fives. Yeah, so it was bad. And yet, this is the thing. You asked about respect, Tim. I began to respect not just the elders who were inflicting this punishment, but everyone there who's committed to this act. This was a ceremony that kept the community alive. We're talking about an incredibly harsh environment with the malaria, with this humidity, the swamplands, the crocodiles, and so on. And everyone was engaged in keeping the ceremony going. This is what enabled the community to survive. And we began to realize the key to it was working together. We would be allowed out of the ceremony. We would be judged men as strong as crocodiles on the day that we had worked properly together. At the beginning, you imagine we were being beaten all the time, so people were crying. It was pretty bad. But we weren't really working as a team. As we got stronger, we began to realize we had to organize ourselves. The older boys had to protect the younger boys. We all had to try and raise each other's morale by singing songs. I sang My Way, by the way, which was quite a local favourite. The missionaries, they used to sing My Way. You know what I mean? Frank Sinatra's My Way. And so this cheered people up. I used to sing now. So I used to sing this song, and everyone thought this was great. What they really wanted was my national anthem. And I said, you don't really want a national anthem. I was thinking, God Save Our Gracious Queen. The British, I'm quite patriotic, but it's not a very good national anthem, not like yours. You've got a great one, rousing stuff. But I thought if they like it, I'll have to sing it. So I began singing God Save Our Gracious Queen. They said, not bad, your national anthem. Old MacDonald had a farm. So somehow they thought that was my national anthem. And anyway, that's what I used to sing more than even My Way. I sang it day after day because that's what went down best. So I'm joking about this, but this humour was incredibly important when we were going through these harsh times. We had to find something in ourselves. So the elders were creating a crisis, artificial crisis, by beating us. And we had to find something within ourselves and within the group. And you had to learn to respect yourself and those around you. And it was through undergoing this thing together that we learned that respect, because we knew, well, in our case, we just had to, because we wouldn't be allowed out until we had learned to respect ourselves. But it was an extraordinary lesson in you're only as strong as the weakest member of your team. And we couldn't allow one member to be weak. So we had to raise up the weakest member of our group. There are about 20 boys, and by the end about 30ish maybe. Yeah, maybe there were about 30 of us. And so we had to look for the weakest and help them in some way by being funny, by singing funny songs, or by being very serious and listening to them when they had a crisis. So it was a huge lesson. The day came when we were allowed to run out into the village and embrace our loved ones. We were pushed off into the water one by one as well, symbolically, given our freedom, like mother crocodiles do with their young. They drop them in the water, and we now had that freedom. But with freedom comes responsibility, and we had learned that perhaps above all, that yes, we were free, but we were only free really because we knew ourselves and we knew each other. And you're asking about what we could learn in the West. I think I wouldn't want anyone to go through that ceremony. Obviously, I mean, you could just say it's cruel, but this is our way we might see it. But it was, wow, it was such a lesson for us all. And I always try and encourage young people at schools or wherever that I go to push themselves beyond their limits, because that's when you have to find something. We were made to find something in that situation. But if you push yourself beyond your comfort zone, the same thing happens. You find something in yourself that'll keep you going.
You made a conscious choice to abandon technology. Looking back, was that about purity of exploration or about forcing yourself to listen more carefully to others?
Yeah, this happened sort of gradually. I found myself learning from indigenous people, the local people, because I didn't have sponsors, because no one really wanted to sponsor me, because I started so young without any training. As I said, I wasn't in the army, I wasn't in the forces, didn't have made much experience at all. So I learned this other way, which was just to turn to local people and learn their skills. And that meant in itself I had to go alone, really, so that I could be quietly learning for month after month, whether in New Guinea or the Amazon or Chukotka in the Russian Far East, from the Chukchis, who are the reindeer herders, or in the Gobi Desert, or in all of these environments, I turned to the indigenous people. And so it was purely practical at first. And then I felt it was the right thing to do, at least for me, because I had to listen more intently in order to learn. I had to be more sensitive. And it was an early lesson from I suppose, my first 2 or 3 expeditions. I realized the more vulnerable you are, the more you learn, and the more open you are to experience. And it's a very tricky thing. So I realized there's a value in being vulnerable. And that goes against a lot of army training, survival training, because of course you want to be as strong as possible. You're always taught, strength, you've got to be ready, got to be prepared. Of course you have to be ready, you have to be prepared. But if you're too trained, you're not open to anything is new out there that can help you take a new step forward. So that sounds a bit counterintuitive, of course. I mean, the more trained you are, the better. But there's something about being thrown up against it alone that forces you anew. Because every environment, every situation is slightly different. And if you're not trained from the outside, but are being trained locally from people like the Matses, the so-called Jaguar people, or the Nyara, so-called crocodile people, if you're learning these different techniques, you can bolt them onto your knowledge base. So it started out as totally practical, learn from the indigenous people because they didn't have any money, and they had a great amount of knowledge. And then it felt right after a while. Bearing in mind, I'm a Brit, we've got this long history of imperialism. So there's that in my mind as well. I didn't want to be one more person conquering, and that's something we have to be aware of in our culture. But actually, frankly, all European cultures have to be aware of. So there was that political edge as well. I felt, it's just right to listen to local people. But I think it was a great teacher. Being vulnerable, I felt, was good. There's a limit, though. You've got to be vulnerable and yet know the limits of your vulnerability, limits of your strength. You've got to be able to navigate that interesting area between being open and fresh and not knowing, and knowing enough that will get you through. So it's your core values, your core strengths, and once you really understand those, then you can take the confidence really to be open to other experiences. You can set off in a state of vulnerability because you've got your cores worked out. You know your strengths, you know your weaknesses, you know how far you can push yourself.
In your case, pushing yourself is an understatement. You've nearly died 9 times. At what point did survival stop feeling like luck and start feeling like responsibility?
Oh, the responsibility. That's not the word I thought you were going to use. That's interesting. I think I have to be honest and say there's so much luck in so much of my survival, and it's something that haunts me really. And I think it's so often the case. I mean, I often, because of my relationship with nearly dying quite a few times, perhaps I'm more alert than most people to when I hear about a disaster or a death. I often work through the parameters thinking how lucky or unlucky was that? Was that just, what's the play here? But so many things are luck. Responsibility is, it's very difficult. Okay, let me put it another way. The thing that haunts me most, after having been shot at, we haven't even got on to my sledge dog team in the Arctic. I lost my dogs. I had 10 dogs in the Arctic. I was trying to cross the Bering Strait from the Russian Far East to Alaska. And the blizzard came up in the pack ice and I was separated from my dogs and I nearly died. We can talk about that if you like, as a relief from the jungle. But, you know, a lot of these incidents could haunt me, but the thing that haunts me most is a funny thing, a strange incident, so minor, it should have been. I was in Indonesia. I was in a hut, an indigenous house, and it was on a platform, quite high off the ground. There were a lot of pigs and dogs around, forest everywhere. And I got up from this hut and I thought, I'll just jump down. I had my big jungle boots on. I thought I'd just jump down from this platform, raised above the ground, probably 2 meters high, a bit less. I thought I'd just jump down. So nothing could go wrong, you know, just jumping down onto the ground. As I jumped these 2 meters down from this hut onto the ground, I realized that someone had placed a spear right below me. And as I jumped, I saw this spear go like this, the point of it go right past my jaw, past my eye, past my hair. I felt it. Boom. So if that had been 5 millimeters nearer me, it would have gone into my eye, into my brain. And it haunts me, I suppose, because I saw this in slow motion as I fell, and I could see this blade go like that. And so that, in a way, represents it. It seemed like it would have been a random death. It felt like, and I think the reason why it haunts me was it was just an everyday act, jumping down. I was relaxed, wasn't really thinking about survival, and I almost died that day, simply because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, as it were. It was just a bit of bad luck. Someone had put their spear the wrong way up. It plays with me because it's not part of my training. You know, I'm a trained person now. Rainforest, desert, Arctic, I can cope. And I've been put through it in all these environments. And generally, things, you know, months go by when nothing happens at all. Not just danger, but nothing happens. So, you know, I'm used to coping in these environments. They're more like home. But that, wow, from nowhere, in a place where I thought I was safe, in someone's home, boom, that spear almost got me. So, that, you know, there'll always be these unlucky things, same as Pablo Escobar, you know, the fact that the most wanted man in the world happened to be hanging out by the river. You know, that was not part of the plan. So these things get thrown to you that aren't part of the plan, that aren't part of exploration, really. The same way of stepping out in front of a car. It could happen to any of us. These things can just happen. Responsibility, yeah. I mean, I try and double think. I have these protocols. I have plan A, plan B. I have an exit strategy, which is a plan C. A lot of these expeditions, I'm not thinking forward at all of where I'm going, which is what you'd like to think. I'm navigating probably with a compass, but your mind should be ahead. It isn't often with me. It's behind because I'm thinking, okay, I've got to remember that waterfall, got to remember that tree because I've marked it. I'm thinking of the way back, the way out, the way to safety, the way home. So responsibility, I don't know how to answer that, but it's very, I've got to be careful now because I'm a parent. I've got children, and I know there's that random factor, that luck factor that can trip you up. Um, and so, however careful and disciplined and skilled I might think I am, or that I am, you can't account for those random things. When I camp in the Amazon, I know where to camp. I have to stay a certain distance from the river in case there's going to be a flash flood at night. I look up, see if there's a tree fall possibility. The tree might come down in the night. Bee's nest, wasp nest. Clear the leaf litter, see if there are ants, spiders, scorpions, snake holes. There's a sort of protocol, and you can eliminate so much of the risk, but you never can quite do it totally. And yeah, I'm responsible to myself and the people I'm often leading, Indigenous people.
After malaria nearly killed you, did your relationship with risk change, or did your understanding of limits simply become sharper?
I've had malaria 6 times. So did I learn from that? Not necessarily. But I think my knowledge of myself became sharper. I think I understood the nature of my body a bit more. I think the nature of my mind a little bit more. So there's a sort of inner terrain, you could say. There's that terrain I'm trying to explore out there in the Amazon, in New Guinea, or wherever. But there's this inner terrain, and so much of it, so much of the business of survival is about that inner terrain. For me, it's about 80%. There are a lot of survival experts you see on the telly, and I'm thinking, oh, that's a great trick. How to, I don't know, eat a scorpion or whatever. These things don't really matter. In most situations, it's your mind. Yeah, food, water, shelter, but it's your mind. 80% of whether you're going to survive or not comes down to the mind, to me. Um, and so it's about building that stock of knowledge, but it's more than that. It's the belief. You've got to have this unshakable belief. So malaria haunts me partly because I've had it so often. I think I've got some ability to attract it, it seems, despite medicine or whatever. But it haunts me because I can't think clearly, and everything comes back. I said it earlier. You've got to be able to think your way forward, and it's not just about practical tasks like navigation, writing a message to anyone who might be tracking you to help them find you. It's not about these basic survival tricks. It's about your mind being able to believe that you can get yourself going and keep yourself going. So malaria is one that bothers me because your mind goes if you've got malaria. So you lose that vital fighting tool, which is your brain, your belief.
I'm sure people often ask whether what you do is courageous or reckless. How do you tell the difference when you think about that?
I laugh because I definitely don't think of myself as courageous. I just, it's my job. I take it quite seriously. I don't think I'm taking myself very seriously, but I take my job quite seriously. So I know why I'm there. I think it through to myself. And that can be delusional, of course. I think, oh yeah, it's important to do this expedition. Perhaps it isn't at all. But so courage, yeah, I don't think it's courage because I just feel it's I've learnt through my mistakes, and I've got a certain knowledge now, and it's not courageous what I do. I don't think of myself as a risk taker. I should say that. People think I'm a risk taker. I don't. I think of myself as a challenge taker. I take challenges. There's such a difference. I take up a challenge that I think is stands a reasonable chance of success. And people think adventurers are mad. The mad ones don't last very long. You've got to be pretty sane, really. Yes, there's certain people. Of course, there's a thrill, the adrenaline seekers. But I'm not a mountaineer. A mountaineer, in mountaineering, as I see it, anyway, there's a lot of risk taking. There's a lot of things you can't calculate. Avalanches.
The type of challenges or explorations that you did that drastically change, like before kids versus after kids, or before marriage versus after marriage?
That's a good point. Yeah, I have changed a lot since I began. Actually, really, since I'm married. I think I even allowed myself to marry only because I was stopping the big adventures. What happened was in the Arctic, I got separated from my dogs, as I mentioned. I had a very, very long night, thinking I wasn't going to survive. I was all alone. It was temperatures dropping through the night. The stove I had broke, so it was all looking bad. It was okay in the end. I found my dogs in the next morning, and I got off the ice and got home. But it made me think, no, enough is enough. I've been so fortunate to see so much of the planet and share that knowledge or that experience with people around the world. I thought, just be grateful. And I was grateful, and I am grateful. And I more or less stopped the big expeditions. I allowed myself, I think, to settle down. And that's what I did. I settled down. I married a lovely wife. And and I've now got 3 children. And so things have been different. They're probably not quite as different as people think, because, before I was always racked by guilt thinking about my mum and dad. I didn't want to let them down. Now I don't want to let down my children. And it is different because they're that much more vulnerable, of course. So I wouldn't want to let them down. And things have changed. I don't think it's foolhardy or what I do. I mean, things can go wrong, as they did in New Guinea about 8 years ago. I had children, but I got separated off from the outside world by 2 warring communities. Then I got malaria and dengue fever. I couldn't get out. None of that was meant to happen because I had children, and I thought, time for these adventures is gone, but it did happen. So, yeah, you can't discount these things. I mean, you can't assume they're not going to happen. But yeah, things have changed. It's no longer the same having children. I still go, but I just don't quite go as drastically. So I have reined myself in a little bit, I have to say, but there's always what can be those things that go wrong.
When the media tells your story, especially during moments like Papua New Guinea, how hard is it to watch your life reduced to headlines instead of intent?
It's hard because I don't like to think I'm a control freak, but on an expedition or like in any endeavor on the sports field, I imagine, you've got to try and keep control of your operation. And in my case, I'm potentially very vulnerable because there's no backup, there's no GPS, it's down to me. So to find the whole thing suddenly, the narrative changed by the outside world or by someone else, it's quite hard. I mean, I have to say, what I do is my choice. Therefore, I can't complain. It's not like I'm being made to almost die 9 times, or it's all. When things go wrong, I have to expect criticism and blame and so on. So, because it's not like I'm doing something that I've been forced to do. Um, but it's hard. But of course, me being criticised is one thing. It's hard when it's my wife or family. What happened in New Guinea was that yeah, two rival newspapers wanted the story of rescuing me, and I was rescued in the end. Before that happened, because I was trapped between these two warring factions and had malaria and dengue fever. I was trying to find my own way out of the situation. I had a lot of local people who I trusted so much, and they were headed off in three different directions to try and get a message to the outside world, so that I could get out of the forest and safely through this fighting. I sort of felt I had it under control. But meanwhile, the outside world had their own narrative. Some newspapers were saying I was amongst headhunters and cannibals. Other people said that were attacking me because I was a white man, saying, what's a white man doing in New Guinea? Other people saying, hooray, he's an old-fashioned explorer like Dr. Livingstone, and these old these people like Scott of the Antarctic, or so everyone had their different views, but no one really very much looked into why I was actually there, which was to go and say thank yous to some very remote people called the IFO who had been really good to me as a young man, and I had just gone back there to shake their hands and say, "Oh, I just want to say thank you. You looked after me, kept me alive all those years ago, and I haven't forgotten you." That's all I wanted to do. But that sort of story was lost, and everyone else either wanted to rescue me, or which is I'm very grateful for, by the way. But everyone else, one way or another, had their different agendas, and that was natural. I mean, there was a lot of people who cared about me out in the outside world, and that was nice that anyone wanted to come and save me. But it was hard when there were, a few days later, people attacking me saying, "This man's ridiculous. He doesn't take a phone," or anything like that. And my answer would be, well, because I wasn't used as a phone, you can't rescue someone deep in the forest. I got myself to an airstrip, and indigenous people were helping me communicate with the outside world. So, I'd have my own answers, but then, people wanted the personal story of the children who are my children, who are all upset, which they weren't particularly. And nor was my wife, who just wanted me to come home and do the housework. But the idea you would have got was that she was raging at this imbecile husband who'd gone off and done something stupid again. It wasn't like that. It was just Lenty coming home, because it's about time he took the children to school and did all these other jobs he should be doing.
What part of your character was shaped not by success, but by failure or misjudgment in the field?
Maybe all my characters been shaped by misjudgment or failure. It's so hard to say what I've done that's successful. Yes, I pulled off these journeys, but I tend to think of this as vanity. I don't like it. I feel uncomfortable with the idea that I've succeeded. So I tend to think of the whole thing as a learning curve, the whole of my life, the whole of this, every single endeavor, whether it's gone badly or not. But I'm thinking of one of my last big expeditions when I was trying to cross the Bering Strait with my dog team. That was the most terrible expedition, I failed. I didn't manage to get across to Alaska. And it hasn't been done in hundreds of years. Well, not hundreds of years, but the border has been closed. Since the communism came about and so on. So people haven't been backwards and forwards in the traditional way with Chuchi, the indigenous people's sledges and so on. So I was traveling in the traditional way with sledges and dogs. So no one knows of that happening since about 1910 or something. So about 100 years before. So I failed. I got halfway ish, and the ice began breaking up, and I lost my dogs. So I had to retreat. And this, even getting there was a nightmare. I was in pain every day. I had frostbite on my first day out there. It was the worst winter in living memory. Conditions far, far colder than I wanted, and I was having to handle 10 dogs all the time with these frostbitten fingers, and it was just so painful and so agonizing. I just didn't enjoy myself. So a terrible expedition, and yet the best. It really was extraordinary because the dogs didn't trust me at first. I mean, why would they? I turned up unskilled in the Arctic. The dogs sensed that, and they wouldn't listen to me. I was trying to command them "Takte," which means left in Chuchi, "Steer," which means right. I was giving these commands, the dogs ignoring me for weeks and weeks as I was trying to train them, and it was terrible. Then the time came; they gradually learned to trust me, and it made, for all of that agony, this wonderful this moment came when they just believed in me. They'd seen that I was learning, and I had been judged, as it were, by the dogs to be sufficiently capable of leading them as the master of their dog team. So it shaped me hugely because it reminded me really of how the harder things are, the more you learn. And this was a later expedition. I should have learned this right at the beginning, probably, but this is such a graphic case of that. These dogs showed their devotion to me in this highly dangerous environment. It's minus 40, or even worse, out there on the pack ice. I was alone with them, but the dogs trusted me to take them out over this pack ice with the polar bears out there hunting, with the wolves, in terrible conditions. Ice might have broken up, but still the dogs trusted me. Even though I was in pain, there was this beautiful, beautiful time we had together. And I suppose, yeah, it hasn't quite answered your question, but it's, that was an expedition that failed, and yet it was the most brilliant expedition because I was at home, I felt, in the Arctic, the hardest environment humans have ever settled. That was what triumph really meant. It wasn't the fulfilling my original objective. It was something better, which was about knowledge.
Where has your faith or your sense of something beyond yourself been most present when you thought you might die or when you came home alive? I ask this without any judgment. I don't think I was personally doing faith the right way until Jesus gave me one more chance through my ALS diagnosis. Now, I finally feel that missing piece is there. Anyways, can you tell us about your faith journey?
It's been complicated. I was brought up in a fairly generally religious way, not a devout family at all. But my parents weren't really believers, and I think my father was a scientist, and I think he found it difficult. Even when my mum suddenly died, I think he found it. He felt, why would God allow this to happen? He felt angry. But as for me, I've always found God very elusive, and it's a strange thing for someone who's, I should be touching the infinite so often. And maybe it's what has helped me or made me drive myself on, looking for answers. I'm a restless person and someone who never quite has come up with answers in that department. And it does strike me as strange that I haven't, because there have been so many times, either emergencies when I've nearly died, or slow disasters when I've had lots and lots of time to think. And I think each of these occasions I thought isn't the right time to think about does God exist or not, because and maybe this is the test piloty thing that you've got to look for what you absolutely know is there ahead of you. It's like looking at your instruments in a cockpit. You have to trust your instruments. And in these situations, I'm trusting my skills, my experience, and so on. So looking for something bigger hasn't seemed to be the right answer. I've tended to turn to believing in my mum and dad or my wife or my children to extract myself from these situations. And I've lived with so many missionaries and so on they've seen me heading off into what looks like certain death, to them probably. And they've so wanted me to believe at the last minute. So they've been praying for me as I set off in New Guinea or in the Amazon. Please just make this leap of faith. And I don't know it just seems to be part of my, maybe it's because there have been so many of these incidents. I sort of cling on with my fingernails to life. I don't sort of surrender myself to something bigger. And that sounds such an arrogance, I know. But in terms of feeling part of something bigger, that I feel all the time. I think awe is incredibly important. I think it's missing in our societies back here in the West. We need to believe in something bigger than ourselves. And I've seen that with all the cultures I've lived with. People believe in something bigger. Amongst the Nyara, the crocodile people, they talk about the Avuk-Wak. The Avuk-Wak wasn't quite God, but he was sort of halfway there, half crocodile, half ancestor figure. And I've, alone in the desert, alone in the trees in the Amazon, I felt something bigger out there. But I tend to, in my mind, think of it as nature or think of it as the infinite, rather than see an embodiment of a person. And I don't know why that is, but it's just the way it's turned out. But maybe that's what's kept me going. I do think one disaster has led to another, in that I've wanted to understand, why didn't I die back in the Amazon? Was the dog that I ate, was that given to me by God so that I would survive? I saved that dog's life earlier on, and then it came to a time when that dog could save me by allowing itself to be eaten, as it were. So what was this? I've had these conversations in my mind endlessly. That have I been spared all these 9 times, however many times it is? Is that why I haven't died? Has God kept me back for something else? I'd certainly, I think, help drive me on to the next adventure. But have I got near an end? No. Which is probably why I've still got this restlessness. It's what perhaps keeps me going. I've sort of touched the infinite, but not understood it.
Again, without any judgment, I would urge you to keep searching. You're close. Hey, if you could speak to the younger Benedict standing at the edge of his first expedition, what encouragement or warning would you give him?
I would say slow down. I think I was kept alive. Maybe this was God saving me for something better that will happen now in my life. But this luck or something or other saved me again and again and again. I was so inexperienced. And I try and say this to my children now. Make mistakes now. It's better to fall out of a tree now than as an adult. You learn about yourself. So I was spared on that first expedition. I was very fortunate that I didn't make too many mistakes of a big sort. You've got to make mistakes. You've got to allow yourself to make mistakes. So I would have encouraged myself to make a lot of little mistakes, because that's when you learn. You don't want a big mistake because it might kill you. So you've got to make these little mistakes. But I'd say go for it and don't follow the same route. just be aware that it's that belief. You've got to just believe in yourself more, because without that, there was there's a lot ahead of you. You're going to die almost. You're almost going to die 9 times. You're going to have all these terrible things. Just believe in yourself. Believe in yourself. It will be okay. And that belief is so special. It's so easy to rob someone of that. I was so vulnerable, and I could have turned around after 2 weeks and walked home, and that would have been the end of my career, or rather my life of adventure, because I just would have not quite believed in myself. But there's just enough encouragement all the time that I learned to believe in myself, and that's what made all the difference. And if I'd known that, it would have really helped.
Do you think that if your kids wanted to do what you do and be explorers and kind of go do these crazy adventures, maybe pre-marriage, pre-kids Benedict adventures, would you be supportive like your dad was and just like go and good luck and figure it out? Or would you want to, I guess your mom was still supportive, but she was supportive while crying.
I would say, yeah, go for it, go. Got to follow your dream. However, also follow your passion. I'm wary of people following their dreams. Dreams are traps as well. It's no good everyone wanting to be on the stage acting, or wanting to be a baseball player or whatever. Follow your passion. Look to see what you're good at. Look to see what you're passionate about, and try and marry those two together. Thing is, the world has changed. You can't do the journeys I used to do. The world is much more crowded, and there's also someone who was, I read environmental science. I studied environmental science and ecology at university. I'm very aware that there's a lot of environmental problems out there, and maybe that's now where exploration should lie. I started off doing almost like high adventure, and all my early expeditions. So there's so much adventure in there. I think maybe it's time to think less about the adventure, more about the discovery side and what can be done to help the planet. But that's a bit serious. I suppose I'd say go and do it, but I'd hope that they would be better prepared than I was, just in knowing themselves. I mean, you learn on these expeditions, as I've said, but you got to, before you get yourself into a stage where you're so vulnerable, try and be a bit more prepared. Try and know yourself better, know your capabilities better. So yeah, I'd encourage them. I wouldn't be like my mum, holding them back. I do think it's no good just wanting to be an adventurer. You've got to really need to. I mean, at least if you're doing it year after year, you've got to really have that thirst, that desire. And I had that. I don't know if my children have it, if I'm honest. My youngest, very much youngest one, might have. A bit early to say, she's only 10. But the others haven't got that drive, which comes, it's a two-edged sword. It's that restlessness, that questing nature, whatever it is that drives me on, can make you always looking for something more, never been quite satisfied. That's not a good thing, I suppose, in terms of enjoying your life. But it can mean a very rich life, and that's what I've had. So I'm always on to the next thing, but it's along the way and collecting such richness.
One more hard question, and then we can do a fun one. Do you think solitude reveals who we are, or does it strip us down until something truer finally emerges?
Yeah, I think it's both of those. I think being alone, it teaches you what you're missing. As I say, humans are social creatures. So when you're alone, you feel that need to fill your world with things you haven't got. And so I think what strips you down really is being pushed till you're, most of the time I'm alone, everything's going very well. So being alone doesn't really so much matter. But when you're being stretched and alone. That's the hardest thing. And yeah, you're stripped down and stripped down and stripped down. You hope there's something substantial in your heart that's enough to enable you to keep on going. And yeah, I think I'm very rarely lonely, except when if I'm alone, generally I'm fairly happy, but I can feel very, very alone in a crowd. I can feel very, very alone when my expeditions aren't sorting out. I felt very alone in the Arctic with my dog team when there were 10 dogs who were all ganging up on me, basically. They didn't want to do what I wanted to do. And I think that felt very, very lonely. So I think it's not the loneliness, it's not the solitude, it's the being got at by the world, or got at by your feelings, your doubts. There's times when you're eroded by the world or yourself. And that's when you discover what you've got left in the middle of it all.
Before we close, brag about your family for a minute and tell us what you hope they understand about the risks you took, the reasons you took them, and the love that always pulled you home.
With my children understand, I think, that I'd really not do anything stupid. I mean, things have gone wrong, but essentially now I'm not doing what I used to do as a young man. So it's my brother, my sister, my mum and dad. They're the people who went through the hardest time. But they always knew that this is what I felt was my vocation. They felt this is what he's always wanted to do. It helped a lot that I was doing this from the age of 10, or at least wanting to. They could see I just didn't give up. This is what I felt destined to do. I think that was very reassuring to them. They realized this wasn't something trivial, and that if things were going to go wrong, it was because I felt I was doing the expedition for a good, solid reason. At the very least, it was because it's what I really believed in doing. Whether that expedition was important to the rest of the world is a different thing, but I think it's always been part of these expeditions. I come back and share what I've done, whether at schools or whether through books or through filming myself on the telly. It's been part and parcel of the process, and I'm sure they understand that. So I think that they would say that the risks are worthwhile. I hope they would. I think it's always harder to be one of them rather than one of me. If I would go to follow my dream, there they were left at home waiting. And generally, those people who know me understand that I'm not a frivolous person. I don't go for fun. I don't go for adventure. And the things that go wrong, they're brief. They're pretty catastrophic sometimes. But generally, an expedition takes 6 months, and then Pablo Escobar comes along and ruins it all, for 2 or 3 minutes. So these things can happen, but they know that I calculate odds all the time. I'm calculating whether to turn left, turn right, to retreat, and that I'm not just messing about. And I think that matters. It matters to me, and I think they understand, therefore, that I don't do it with a light heart, or not an insincere heart. I try my best, and they do know, because I've had to do it time and time again, that I'll do whatever it takes to walk through that forest, to walk through that desert in order to get safely home again.
Now on to our final word segment, where we ask our guests a few rapid fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
Coming out of the Namib Desert, and this was just so brilliant. My mum had died at the beginning of the expedition, totally unexpectedly, and I now knew I'd got rid of all my fears and horrors of having watched her die, and I had done something that sort of was very cleansing out in the desert with my camels, and I could now go home to my dad and hug him and know that my life will carry on and his too.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
There are too many. The biggest one, I suppose, crossing the whole of the Amazon basin, just because it was a 7.5 month journey and things went wrong all the way from the first few days when I broke my ribs falling off a horse, to being shot at by Pablo Escobar, to being robbed by loggers and left to die.
What are you most excited about?
There's no single thing, but it's just there will be another adventure, and I suppose it would be taking my children off, and it's just seeing their look of awe and wonder, so magical. So somehow or other, there'll be a journey where I take all of my children, and we'll go and do something absolutely extraordinary. And we'll all cry, and we'll all laugh, and we'll get through it.
What advice would you give your younger self? We kind of did this one, but
I'd say just hang on in there. It'll all be right in the end, but keep believing. Just keep believing.
Do you have any book recommendations for us or for the listeners?
Do you know what? I edited a book called The Faber Book of Exploration, and it's just brilliant because it's a compendium of all these different explorers, American, French, Brits, doesn't matter. They've all got this desire to explore our amazing planet, and it's just great. I edited this collection together, Faber Book of Exploration. It's just full of all these inspiring people.
The name of our podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything you want to say?
Just that we are all explorers, and people think of exploration as from the past. It's not from the past, it's from the present, and it's from the future. We need explorers more than ever. So I think it's important to get out there, bear witness to the world, which is an amazing place, and share whatever it is you do find out there.
that's great. At the end of every podcast, Benedict, I ask our guests, now that you got to know us a little bit, who are people that you know personally that you think we should have on to try and tell their story?
Yeah, Niall McCann. Niall McCann. He is great. He is an adventurer. He's a biologist. He really gets out there, and he had a terrible paragliding accident, broke his back. He's managed to get himself together, and he's done all sorts of expeditions despite this terrible back injury. So Niall McCann, really inspiring person, and a true adventurer and scientist.
Benedict, thank you for reminding us that real discovery isn't about maps or firsts. It's about humility, listening, and knowing when to turn back toward what matters most. Your life shows us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to be changed by it. So thank you for joining us today, and I hope God continues to bless you and your family.
Thank you.
Thank you, Benedict.
That was such fun and so inspiring and so interesting. And I haven't asked you, either of you, about your lives. But anyway, I have looked at some of the podcasts, so I look forward to seeing more of them.
Awesome. Thanks so much.